And we are live on Facebook. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Storm Team Meteorologist Griffin Hardy, and we've got the newest 4 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center on Hurricane Dorian, and it's still basically not moving. You see there the movement, north at 0 miles per hour. I guess they note that it's starting to make that turn to the north, but at the moment it's stationary and not moving. And that is still, that is the worst possible news that you could hear if you're on the islands of the Bahamas. Over the past 12 hours, pretty much, they've just been getting absolutely whacked by this storm because it hasn't moved all that much, and they've had the eye wall, the worst part of it, sit right over top of Grand Bahama Island and the Abaco Islands that you see there just off the coast of Florida. And we'll go over the latest data from the National Hurricane Center. Again, moving north at 0 miles per hour, but again, that's better than west. It's starting to make that turn to the north as forecasted, finally starting to kind of move not towards Florida anymore, but more likely going to be moving parallel to Florida like we've been thinking it's going to do over the past couple days. And more good news, it seems that Dorian has essentially peaked in intensity. Earlier this morning, the minimum central pressure was down to 922 millibars. And we're up to 940, which is good because the lower the pressure is, the more intense the storm is, and now we know that the pressure is rising. It looks like the eye of the storm in the center is kind of gyrating a little bit. It doesn't have that perfect circle look like it had yesterday, and going into this morning, it's kind of losing its structure, so to speak, and that is more than likely happening due to the interaction with the land that's been happening. So here's the latest warnings, all the alerts from the National Hurricane Center. We've got a boatload of them to go over. The most significant warnings that we have in effect are, of course, the hurricane warnings, and those will remain in effect until today is Monday. So really, these are in effect until it says they expire on Sunday, but more than likely they'll be discontinuing them after that. But those hurricane warnings extend really from Port St. Lucie, all the way up I-95 to Palm Bay, and up towards Daytona Beach. That's where the most significant wind speeds will more than likely be happening. And those could be, anywhere from 70 to 80 miles per hour when Dorian makes that closest approach to the Florida coast. And farther north, we've got hurricane watches in effect. Those include Flagler Beach, Palm Coast, St. Augustine, Ponte Vedra, Jacksonville Beach. Those extend northward up into Georgia. So that means hurricane conditions are possible, but not necessarily worried about it being all-out hurricane force winds. More than likely, they're going to be dealing with winds on the order of 50 to 60 miles per hour when Dorian makes its closest approach on Tuesday, Wednesday. And then farther inland, where the winds won't be quite as strong, you've got tropical storm warnings in effect for the Orlando metropolitan area, Kissimmee, Deltona, Yeehaw Junction, and then you go in farther, and tropical storm watches are in effect. So that's the latest on the warnings. Let's go over, let me show you this real quick, just because the visible satellite imagery with the storm is just stunning. We have GOES-16, which is the latest satellite that we use, the latest geostationary orbiting satellite that we use for weather observations, and we have one sector of it that can get 30-second to 1-minute imagery, and that's what we have here. They have one of the two sectors flipped onto Dorian, and you can see it. It's still got just a textbook structure. And you see all these outer bands coming ashore over Florida. Those are outer bands, that you typically have a little bit more lightning strikes with those. Those can sometimes be capable of producing tornadoes, but in this case, I don't really think that that's going to be a significant problem because it's certainly a possibility, but the Storm Prediction Center hasn't really outlined much of Florida in their severe weather outlooks, and typically they'll do that if tornadoes are a possibility, and I don't think that's going to be a concern with this storm especially, because it's going to be moving parallel to shore. Typically when you have storms that are moving directly towards the coastline or perpendicular to the coast, then you worry a little bit more about tornadoes. Not necessarily the case for today. And again, here's the radar imagery. You can definitely see more of those outer bands coming ashore as all the moisture wraps around that center of circulation. Eye is still definitely showing up very well on the Melbourne radar site, still just kind of sitting there on top of Grand Bahama, and it's ever so slowly making that turn to the north. And here's a look at the wind field. We have estimates of the wind field in our graphic system, and you see obviously all those hurricane force winds still wrapped around the circulation, but the winds drop off pretty quickly as you move closer to the coast of Florida. And we'll query some of these values so we can look at them a little bit more closely. West Palm Beach clocking in at 26 miles per hour, Port St. Lucie 18 miles per hour. That may get a little bit stronger as it kind of edges a little bit. I think it's going to track mainly northwest, sort of like this. I'll draw it out for you. More than likely, it's going to be moving in this general fashion, just like that. It's going to take a while, though. I'll show you the forecast track here in just a second. I'll go ahead and show you the forecast track. Here we go. So this is the updated track from the National Hurricane Center. Not much has changed. We still think it's going to make that parallel track to the Florida coastline, basically just brushing along the coast. And the easiest comparison to make is Hurricane Matthew 3 years ago. It basically did the exact same thing. And there were still impacts from that storm, but it's certainly much better than what it could be. You know, if Hurricane Dorian made a direct landfall, it could be much worse for folks in Florida. And again, by Tuesday, it doesn't really move that. By tomorrow afternoon, this time tomorrow afternoon, it should have weakened fairly down to a Category 3, but still offshore, so that's good. Then it keeps tracking north, so by early Wednesday morning, that's when it makes its closest approach to Daytona, Cape Canaveral, places like that. New Smyrna is in that general area. By Wednesday afternoon, it should be making its closest approach to Jacksonville. And you'll notice that it's still well offshore, and each mile that it stays offshore is a good thing. That means the impact should be significantly lower. And right there, we're talking about 60 to 80 miles offshore, which is good. That's definitely some good news, and you definitely don't want to hear about it making a direct landfall. And then by the time it makes it to the Carolinas, it will have continued weakening because it'll be interacting with the jet stream, but it will be a little bit closer to the coastline. Once it makes it up to South Carolina, it makes it past Myrtle Beach, closer to Wilmington, North Carolina, and places like that. And then it may just barely brush the outer banks of North Carolina near Cape Hatteras, but then by Friday, we're basically done with it, and we don't have to worry about it as it gets jettisoned off to sea and out into the open Atlantic. So by Friday, we'll definitely be done with the storm. But for the next couple of days, of course, we're going to have to keep watching it very closely because, it's a matter of miles. And that's what's it's been hard to explain that to people. Each mile that Dorian comes closer to the coast, the more significant the impacts will be. And the impacts in Bermuda are certainly, substantial. I'm sure many of you have seen the frankly horrifying video that's been coming in all across the Bahamas of people being stranded in homes and just site-built structures just being completely blown apart. And in the latest observations coming in from Sebastian Point in the Bahamas, they're still dealing with at least tropical storm force winds as Dorian just kind of sits there. And just for reference, Settlement Point is right on the edge of the Grand Island of the Bahamas, just to the west of Freeport, right about there. Hold on, I'll draw it. That right about there is about where Settlement Point is. So again, still thinking that it's not going to make direct landfall. That's the main thing to remember here is that it certainly could be much worse. And overall, think in your head that what Matthew did should be very similar to what Dorian is going to do if you live up and down the coast of Florida, or if you have property or family in the coast of Florida. They should remember Hurricane Matthew. I think all in all, that's going to be the best comparison for this storm. So that's the latest from the National Hurricane Center on Hurricane Dorian. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer them. But otherwise, stay safe, everybody, and have a great day. And one more thing to remember. Not impacting central Alabama in any way. We will have no impacts whatsoever from the storm. Important thing to remember for those of you tuning in via CBS 42 on Facebook. Okay, have a great day, everybody.